everyone, and welcome back to Rowing with the Homies. I'm Finlos. I hope you're able to get some movement in today. What is today? It is Friday, May 9th. I'm getting started a little bit late today. It's nighttime. But I hope that you're able to find your rhythm, find your focus, whether you're out on the water or out on a trail or just walking around your neighborhood. Whatever your movement looks like today, I'm truly thankful that you're choosing to spend your time with me now. And I read a lot of news. I know I say that a lot, but sometimes I kind of surprise myself when I look at my history and see how much I do read in a given day. But I really do try to keep up with the news. It's one of the ways that I try to feel like I'm staying in control of my own life, and that I try to stay aware of what's going on. I try to understand the complexity of the world and the time in which we're navigating and living. But of course, the ubiquity of the news coverage, I've been paying particularly close attention to what's been going on in this country and in DC and across the nation since President Trump was inaugurated back in January of this year. And in case you're listening at some point in the future, this is 2025. The picture that really emerges from the headlines, from the analysis, from the reports, it's not just the sort of usual political tug of war that kind of I would associate with healthy debate and governance. It's not that tug of war that we're used to all seeing. It feels deeper. It feels more fundamental. It's different. It's like essential parts of our government are actively in conflict with one another. To use a simile, it's like a body whose organs aren't cooperating, and so the system starts to shut down as the different components work against one another. And a little bit of the term checks and balances, a little bit of that is natural and normal. It keeps things under control. This is different, and it's honestly been weighing on my mind a lot. And it gets me back to what I want to do with this series, connecting what's happening in the world, the news, big ideas, with what's happening inside ourselves, in our bodies, and in our minds. It's about finding the link between the macro and the micro, and the global and the personal. And today, this idea of internal friction, of different forces pushing against each other, and the profound challenge all of that poses to trust. It feels like a core theme that is running through everything I'm going to talk about today. From the highest levels of power to our own personal connections, and right down to the internal landscape of our mental health. I know that's a really big jump, but I'm going to try to connect the recent political clashes in Washington to how we handle arguments in our closest relationships, and then link all that to the deeply internal, painful experience of struggling to trust others when we're battling depression. It's a wide spectrum of things to talk about, but I really do think that there's a a powerful, maybe difficult, but a powerful thread that connects all of these things. It's a thread about how conflict manifests in different arenas, how that conflict impacts our ability to build and maintain trust, and how these external dynamics sometimes mirror or even amplify, exacerbate the internal battles we face. So find your steady rhythm on your machine, on your path, and let's get into this. So as I said, the internal conflicts in our government has really been on my mind. And I'm focusing specifically on what we've seen unfolding since President Trump's most recent inauguration in January of this year, 2025, because in just these past few months, the patterns of friction feel pronounced and I guess more consequential than the last time around. And let's look at some concrete examples that have been in the headlines. A major arena of this internal battle has been between the executive branch and the judiciary. The courts are supposed to be independent, interpreting laws and the Constitution, acting as a check on the other branches. But we've seen ongoing tension, particularly related to immigration policies. News reports have highlighted instances where the administration's actions have led to direct clashes with federal courts, all the way up to the Supreme Court. There have been analyses and even legal publications discussing the administration's seemingly more confrontational approach to judicial authority compared to past norms. All presidents want to expand their powers, but this is different. We've seen reports raising questions about compliance with specific court orders, like recent rulings concerning individuals being deported to El Salvador, such as the Nome v. Abrego Garcia case. This isn't just abstract legal theory. It's the executive branch's actions being legally challenged and sometimes halted by the judiciary, creating public tension and raising fundamental questions about the rule of law and the separation of powers. Another critical area where we're seeing this internal conflict is in the executive branch's relationship with its own governmental institutions and oversight bodies. The Federal Civil Service, for example, millions of people who keep the government running regardless of politics. But recent news has detailed actions taken since January aimed at significantly reducing the federal workforce across various departments. There's also been continued discussion and concern around mechanisms like the Schedule F executive order from the previous term, which critics argue could allow for the removal of large numbers of career officials and inject political loyalty requirements into roles previously protected. The bureaucracy of our government is founded on the tradition of professional long-term civil servants who work across presidencies despite or regardless of which party is in power, and all of that is being threatened. And beyond the civil service, there have been striking reports about challenges to the role of independent inspectors general, watchdogs within agencies who are tasked with preventing waste, fraud, and abuse, And that's always fun, right? When you think about who benefits when oversight is removed. If the ones being watched over remove the watchers, I wonder what that means. And news reports have highlighted instances where inspectors general have faced pressure or have been removed, sparking bipartisan concern about whether independent oversight is being undermined. And yeah, there have even been reports suggesting intentions to dismantle whole agencies, like the Department of Education. When the head of the executive branch appears to be actively working against or seeking unprecedented control over parts of its own structure, it creates massive internal friction. It impacts morale, institutional knowledge, and raises serious questions about accountability and the stability of essential government functions, those things that we actually expect our government to do. Like, keep us safe, to monitor our health and our medicines, to keep the planes from falling from the sky. The dynamic between the federal government and individual states also continues to be a battleground. In our system of federalism, states have significant authority, but the federal government often uses funding to incentivize state action. But just since January, we've seen news reports detailing attempts by the administration to directly control state and local funding or dictate specific policies, particularly on issues like immigration enforcement. And this has led to states filing lawsuits, challenging these federal actions as exceeding constitutional authority and attempting to use congressionally appropriated funds coercively. These aren't minor disagreements. They're significant legal and political clashes over the fundamental balance of power between Washington, D.C. and the states, disrupting collaborative governance. And of course, again, we hear the fights, right? Let the states decide. Leave it to the states to figure it out. But then, really, it's the central government under the rule of the executive actually dictating to the states. So it's which side do you want it? Even more, there's been friction reported with independent federal agencies, bodies like the Federal Election Commission, the FCC, the SEC, so Securities and Exchange, Communications, all of which Congress designed to operate with a degree of independence from direct presidential control. But recent news has reports and even lawsuits challenging executive actions that critics argue attempt to exert inappropriate control over these independent agencies. Like the president demanding the FCC revoke news agencies or networks' privileges to broadcast, or dictating who gets to be part of press pools, or trying to dictate what financial policy is as far as interest rates. And it adds an extra layer to these internal conflicts, suggesting tension not just with the other traditional branches of government, which you might come to expect, but with statutory bodies created to perform specific functions outside of direct executive command, like regulating elections or financial markets. When you put all these pieces together, the ongoing clashes with the judiciary, the actions impacting the civil service and oversight bodies, the disputes with states over funding and authority, the tensions with independent agencies, and you see this pattern emerging consistently in the news just since the start of this year. It paints a clear picture. It's different parts of the same government body, seemingly blocked in opposition, at times disregarding established norms, legal interpretations, or institutional independence. And it creates this undeniable impression that this palpable sense from the headlines and analysis that the US government is in very significant and impactful ways currently operating as if it's at war with itself. And this isn't healthy debate. It's systemic friction. And observing that level of constant high-stakes conflict, it's more than just politically interesting. It's draining. It's concerning for the stability and effectiveness of governance. And it really makes you pause and think about conflict more broadly. How does this kind of constant battle, this breakdown of trust, impact a system? And how does conflict play out in other areas of our lives, even closer to home? Which brings us to the next segment, and that really gets me thinking about conflict, healthy conflict, unhealthy conflict, but what it looks like in relationships. And seeing this kind of intense, damaging friction in the government, this sort of abstract behemoth, does actually get me thinking about conflict in a totally different context. And that's in our personal relationships, the arguments, the disagreements, the moments of tension we experience with the people closest to us, partners, family, friends, teammates, colleagues, and society, and maybe even in politics right now. Conflict, it looks like what we just described. Parts working against each other, trying to dominate or even dismantle systems. And we often carry that idea into our personal lives, assuming conflict is inherently negative, something to be avoided at all costs. But I do want to challenge that a little bit. I think it's absolutely crucial to understand that conflict itself isn't always bad. And mind you, this is coming from a person, me, who throughout much of my life, I have been very conflict avoidant. Conflict is hard, it's uncomfortable. It forces us to face parts of ourselves that we don't really like. And I'm thankful to have a wonderful partner who helps me with this process of learning and reflecting. When handled correctly, conflict can be healthy, even necessary. Because the problem isn't the presence of disagreement, it's the style and outcome of the conflict. And there really is a world of difference between healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict. Healthy conflict is where disagreements happen because we're different people with different needs and perspectives that change and evolve over time, but they're handled in a way that respects the relationship and the individuals involved. Healthy conflict is characterized by mutual respect as a foundation. Even when emotions are high and there is strong disagreement, we maintain respect for the other person's inherent worth. You might say, I disagree with your idea, instead of, your idea is stupid. Clear and direct communication is needed, where you express your own feelings, needs, boundaries, and it also involves active listening, genuinely trying to understand the other person's perspective, decentering, asking clarifying questions, and reflecting back what you've heard to ensure you're on the same page, even if you still might disagree. You remain focused on the specific issues, and you don't try to dig up past conflicts or distract or use shame or embarrassment. There's a willingness to collaborate and problem solve, because the goal isn't to win the argument, but to find a solution or a compromise or a way forward that works for the relationship. It's us against the problem, not me against you. And sometimes it simply means agreeing to understand each other's different viewpoints, even if you can't fully align. Because healthy conflict both reinforces boundaries and builds trust. And if you think about couples who've been together for decades, they've had disagreements, trust me, I know. But the healthy ones learned to listen, to compromise. And that process is how the relationship adapts and continues to grow stronger. But unhealthy conflict is destructive. This is what often comes to mind when we hear the word conflict, even though conflict itself is not itself destructive. It's the kind of conflict that I was talking about earlier that we're seeing reflected in the friction in the government. It looks like disrespect and hostility, name calling, insults, sarcasm, contempt, mockery, belittlement, dehumanization. The intent is not to resolve, but to hurt or to dominate. And this immediately shuts down healthy communication. Unhealthy conflict is avoidant. It involves stonewalling and uses passive aggression. One or both people simply refuse to engage, or they shut down, or they give the silent treatment, or they walk away without resolving anything. It's incredibly damaging because it prevents issues from being addressed and makes the other person feel invisible and unimportant. There's blame and defensiveness, and they take over the conversation. It devolves into a cycle of, this is all your fault. Or, no, it's not. You're the one who did it. There's no responsibility. And the actual problem gets lost in the exchange of accusations. The past becomes weaponized, and every argument becomes an opportunity to dredge up old mistakes, past hurts, or unrelated issues. And it makes the conflict overwhelming and impossible to resolve, as the scope constantly shifts and changes or expands. And ultimately, it has a lack of resolution and causes lingering resentment. Arguments repeat the same patterns, but nothing ever gets fixed. Issues are left unresolved, leading to buildup of resentment, bitterness, and a constant undercurrent of tension. And this kind of unhealthy conflict is corrosive. It breaks down communication. It breaks down trust and creates an environment of fear or hostility, and ultimately leads to relationships becoming strained, distant, or ending entirely. And it's really easy to think about this in terms of our partners, but this is true of all relationships, of friendships, of our siblings, of our children, of our parents, of our coworkers, our bosses, our employees, our friends. The constant stress of unhealthy conflict is really bad for our physical and mental health. It wears us down. It makes us tired. It makes us sick. So the presence of conflict really isn't the issue. The differences that we have are ultimately what allow us to grow together. But it's the way we engage in conflict that is important. We have to learn and practice the skills for healthy conflict in order to build strong, resilient relationships. And it feels particularly relevant when we see the alternative playing out on the macro scale. And to be clear, I'm not a big believer in institutions. I'm not a big believer in the government doing what's best for everybody. So we've talked about watching conflict play out on the macro scale with the government. Then we explored the difference between healthy and unhealthy conflict on the slightly more micro personal relationships, and all this conversation about friction and tension and disagreement, and especially about the profound impact of damaged or absent trust. It brings me to a very personal, sometimes painful place that many of us who have experienced depression understand, because one of the most isolating, terrifying, and honestly exhausting symptoms of depression is a deep and pervasive difficulty with trust. So today, depression feels like everyone is the enemy. And this isn't just a feeling of being cautious or reserved. It's a fundamental, gut-wrenching sense that the outside world is unsafe, and people in it are either actively trying to hurt you, will inevitably hurt you, betray you, or abandon you, or all of the above. And when depression has its grips on my mind, it warps perception, like looking through distorted glass, a broken window. And that distortion is constantly filtering our experiences, especially social ones, looking for threats, looking for signs that confirm the negative stories the depression is telling us. Because depression feeds on feelings of worthlessness, inadequacy, and being fundamentally flawed. When I believe on a deep level that I'm unlovable or a burden, it's incredibly difficult to accept genuine kindness or support from others. My mind automatically looks for the catch, the ulterior motive. A sincere compliment might be dismissed as a manipulation or pity. God, the worst. A friend offering help is seen as them secretly judging or wanting something in return. If someone expresses concern, depression tells me they're just being polite before they realize how awful I am and leave. Every interaction, every look, every innocent comment is scanned analyzed, and then interpreted or misinterpreted through this lens of anticipated threat. Our brains get stuck in a defensive crouch, convincing us that the safest posture is to assume everyone is a potential enemy. Someone who can wound, someone who can confirm our deepest fears about us, and again, ultimately abandon us. And this is an agonizing feeling because it directly attacks the very thing we most need when we're depressed: connection and support. How can we reach out to friends or family members or a therapist when our illness is screaming that they are not safe, that they are enemies, that opening up will only lead to more pain or confirmation of our worthlessness? And it traps us in that cycle. We isolate, and that isolation only deepens the depression, reinforcing the false belief that we're alone and fundamentally disconnected. This feeling of everyone being a potential enemy is a powerful, debilitating symptom of depression. It's crucial to understand that it is the illness, it's the mental state creating the perception, and not necessarily, most likely not, an accurate reflection of the people in our lives or the reality of our relationships. Most people, when they understand what we're going through, want to help, not hurt. But of course, knowing that intellectually doesn't make the feeling any less real, any less terrifying, or any less painful when navigating a constant battlefield where trust is impossible and every interaction carries the weight of potential harm. If you're finding it hard to navigate these feelings, if that sense of isolation, suspicion, or overwhelming difficulty trusting others is present, please consider reaching out. Talk to a trusted friend, a family member, a mentor, or someone in your community, even if it's just sharing a small part of what you're going through. And if these feelings are significantly impacting your life, please consider seeking professional help. Therapists, counselors, mental health professionals are equipped to provide a safe, confidential space and develop strategies to help you process these feelings. I am not a mental health professional. My experiences and my observations reflect my own life living with the symptoms of depression. But I hope that hearing me speak offers you some connection and an understanding that you're not alone. And that's it for this episode. As always, I deeply value your time and your willingness to engage with these topics alongside me. Please reach out if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for the show. You can send me an email to finlos@finloslives.com. You can find me on social media or check out the website at finloslives.com. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you found today's conversation valuable, I'd really, really appreciate if you'd consider sharing the show with anyone in your network who might also find it helpful or interesting. Let's keep moving. Let's keep thinking. And I look forward to our next conversation.